Hi, I'm Marshall Craig, author of You'll Need a Guide, fishing stories that aren't much about the fish, and this is my Mr. Media interview.
To get in the right frame of mind for today's interview, I set aside my usual German bologna and Munster cheese sandwich and went with tuna fish. Because after all the mayonnaise my wife mixes in with a can of tuna, it isn't much about the fish either. Well, my guest today is Marshall Craig, a Yale man and Wharton MBA who says he frittered away most of his life making a living and raising a family when he could have been fishing. And while I know he loves his wife and family, I think he's genuinely pretty serious about his lost time away from casting a line. If you're a man or woman who likes to get away from civilization to fish in remote and exotic places, Marshall is the kind of guy you'll want to do it with. I reached that conclusion based on the humorous essays found in his new memoir, You'll Need a Guide, Fishing Stories That Aren't Much About the Fish. Now, in the interest of full disclosure, I want to share with you that my wife, Mimi, edited Marshall's book, and we liked it so much that we published it under the Mr. Media Books imprint. It's available in paperback or ebook on Amazon or wherever you buy books about fishing. Marshall Craig, welcome to Mr. Media.
Thank you, Bob. It's a pleasure to be here and talk with you.
Good to have you. Now, I'm sure folks are kind of wondering how serious you are about the years you lost making money and being a husband and a dad when you could have been fishing. Did I get that wrong?
Well, no, I gotta say I'm conflicted about it. You know, there are a lot of mornings I got up and went to work where I'm saying, why am I doing this when I could be out somewhere, maybe hooking myself in the hand or falling out of a boat or doing something like being totally unsuccessful at fishing. And yes, the answer is yes. I was conflicted.
Well, tell folks a little bit about your background, where you grew up and about the lost years between college and retirement.
Well, let's see, I started my career, so to speak, as a toilet paper peddler in Chicago. And from thence, I traveled to, I worked for a bank, believe it or not. I've been in management consulting. I've been a corporate dude. I've owned 2 businesses that I started. So I'm basically a guy who just can't sort of figure it out over time. But I've come to the end of this stretch of time and look back and say, okay, I did all right and I'm balanced.
And why did you decide at this point to commit your fishing tales, and the pun was intended, to paper at this point?
Well, I had written stories, as many people like myself do, who have always wanted to write, because fundamentally from the time I was in college, where I worked for the literary magazine, or the humor magazine, I should say, from that time, I've just always written, and I've written stories for friends. I've written a lot of short poems. I've written all kinds of things, and just basically a frustrated writer. And, well, in some ways, I did have some business publications, but that doesn't count so much as the thing I'm really interested in, which is stories about fishing, which give me a lot of pleasure to write about. And mostly I like to focus upon the people that I go out and fish with. And that I come to this point, and I've got a vast, set of stories that I can tell. And so my book captures some of the ones I particularly like because they reflect some of the people and circumstances that are really fun and interesting.
What makes a story about fishing work as opposed to, why can some people tell a good fishing story and others don't? It's not just about, the joke is always the whopper of the fish that you caught. It's a made-up story about that. That's not what you're all about, though.
Well, no, because the fact of the matter is that those of us who are really everyday folk that can fish on only occasionally, maybe once or twice a month if we're lucky for some of us. I live in Florida. I can fish a lot. We don't all catch the whopper fish. But what we all do is we have shared the common thing that we have friends that we go out with, and our interaction with them and the experiences we have, everything from pushing the boat off to having lunch or to what we discuss, or occasionally the fish, yeah. But fishing is so much more than just that finny thing you bring in at the end of a hook. There's a whole lot else that goes around about fishing that engages you as a fisherman.
Could you give folks an example of a Marshall Craig fishing story, or a short aspect of one?
Well, yeah. Let's see. One of my stories in You'll Need a Guide is about a particular trip that I took with a friend to meet two other guys in Missouri, of all places, in central Missouri, to go fishing on this river that has smallmouth bass, and it's a very small community there, Licking, Missouri. It's got 2,000 people. So I have been, as a matter of fact, fishing there many, many times, but I just happened to select one of the experiences to talk about it. But the point is that in the course of fishing there many years, with times, I got to know the people in Licking, the guys that were our guides, and I say that advisedly because these are folks in the country that make a part of their living by this thing called guiding, and the rest of the time they try to make a living. They're raising cattle, they're harvesting hay, and the wintertime when things are rough, they're out doing long haul trucking. But you get to know about them and their lives and the things that are issues to them, and then you get to view their slant on life when you're going down the stream, and you talk about some things, and you really get some insights about what's significant to them. One of my favorite things is there was the Licking, sort of a Licking nightclub, which was referred to as the Knife and Gun Club by these guys. We talk about the fights that would take place in it. And then I recall that one particularly interesting trip I took was late in October, and things are kind of slowing down in the fishing and farming world. And the guys are looking for new opportunities. They're entrepreneurs, this is America. And so they decided to hold an auto auction. And this was a sight that you just couldn't believe. I know this doesn't have to do with fishing, but it has to do with fishing. That they have an auto auction, and they had a stoplight, a red light, an amber light, and a green light. And if the light was green, that means that when you bought that car, the person sold it at the auction to you through the auction, guaranteed that you could in fact drive that for 30 more days. The amber didn't come with 30 days, and the red light means you had to find a way to get it off the auction floor. But this is the kind of a thing that I experienced, and that make it really enjoyable for me, because they expand my knowledge of life and people I see. And I go all the way from there to dealing with a guide in Chokoloskee, Florida, who is a college graduate, University of Florida, ex on the Gator golf team, and hear his observations on life and see him as a guide, as opposed to, of course, the guys who are in Licking, Missouri. So those are the kinds of things that I enjoy particularly.
When you go out on one of these excursions and you hire a guide, I mean, you're together all day, maybe for several days, right?
That's true.
So what I'm curious about is, it's you and some friends and the guide. Does the guide become one of the guys, or do you or he maintain some separation?
That's really a super interesting question. Most guides I've ever been with a few exceptions, are not going to have a celebratory beer with you on the way back, because they're professionals and they view it that way. Obviously, after you've taken 3 trips with somebody, the beer is accepted on the third trip. But it's an interesting thing, because a guide wants more than anything to put you on fish, and that's the singular most important thing to them. Sometimes for you, that's not quite the thing you were looking for. There's some experience type things that are going down. And sometimes I remember going out with a pal, an older gentleman friend of mine, who just wanted to lay back and snooze in the boat as it went down the river. And I couldn't have pleased the guide a whole heck of a lot. But the point is that there is the guide has a function, a purpose, and a thing they want to do. Your purpose is to just enjoy yourself. And there are times when that kind of comes into conflict, particularly if you yourself, and I'm a fly fisherman, and that means that I'm in for a lot of pain and suffering. But when you do something really awkward or really mess up a cast or do something to lose that fish that the guide saw that said, hey, it's out there, it's 35 feet away, give me a cast at 10 o'clock, and you catch your pants with a hook or something, or, you say, ugh, and the guide says, oh, and you know what the guide's thinking. So there's a certain balance there where you have to be aware of what the guide's thinking and you wish you weren't performing so badly. And there's a certain distance that you have.
Is there a better fly fishing movie than A River Runs Through It?
Oh gosh, hardly. I mean, it's a beautiful movie. Brad Pitt's amazing guy. And by the way, I think he might have been, I don't know for sure, he might have actually been doing some fly casting. I think I read that he took lessons while he was doing this. And the scenes of the guy fly fishing on the river are darn good. And he, by the way, that guy can really cast a fly, whoever was doing that in the picture. But the scenes, the river, and the sense of the river runs through it probably feeds into the way I feel about fishing. The river is part of it. The Bahama Flats or the mangrove swamp in Chokoloskee, they're all kind of they're the thing that your life, your experience centers around, but they're not necessarily the whole story. And so the river runs through it with the river as metaphor, with the river as, the meaning of all things. Yeah, it is a good fly fishing movie and a good movie about the whole business of doing it,
Now, I did a very limited amount of fly fishing in my younger days. I've always enjoyed fishing, but for people who may not know what fly fishing is, do you want to just explain that, separate it from just general fishing, with a worm or whatever it might be,
Sure. Well, here's the real deal: is that fly fishing, it kind of enables the fisherman to have a real kind of visual and visceral contact with the fish at the end of the line. And I'm trying to think of how to phrase it exactly. There are a lot of species of fish that you fish in deeper water that require you to have a heavier lure or object that you're casting to them, or bait that goes down deep. But the thing about fly fishing is, by the way, goes back, of course, England a long, long way. The thing about it enables you to fish in a kind of a beautiful, pristine place, i.e. primarily for trout. And it happens that trout, except for the very big guys that feed on minnows and so forth, are feeding on aquatic insects that have a whole life cycle and come to the surface and fly off. Okay, now, in order to deliver a very light fly, or very light lure, I guess I'd call it, to those fish, you've got to fly fish. That's the way you've got to do it. Where the line carries the fly out, a very light, infinitesimally light object, out to land on the water very nicely, very gently, and looking very natural, so the fish feeds. And you can only really achieve that by fly fishing, where the line carries it out, and at the very end of the line there's a leader, maybe a tippet, and the fly drops down lightly on the water, and there you have it. So it's in a beautiful environment, beautiful circumstance, and fly fishing happens to be the thing that delivers this very light object. And the same thing follows in the Bahamas when you're bone fishing. You're talking about 18 inches of water. If you threw a rebel lure on the top of that water, you would say goodbye to every bonefish within the next, quarter acre. But with a fly rod, you can deliver a very light object to the surface of the water, a streamer fly, and just bring it back through the water without catching the bottom and so forth. It's just the right way to fish for those kinds of fish. And it provides a maximum amount of experience and fun. I should say this, that the other attraction of fly fishing is that it's not easy from the onset. You can, in one day, go to a Colorado stream that's maybe 15 feet across, and you can probably deliver a fly, although the question of landing it properly so that it doesn't so that it has a natural look is also difficult. But when you begin to go through a longer cast, that kind of thing, now you need to develop a skill in casting. And that skill, the ability to make a good presentation, is a very rewarding thing of itself and makes you feel like you've really accomplished something, as opposed to having a spinning reel or a bait casting reel and just simply taking back the bail, letting her rip, and throwing her out. So fly fishing requires a certain skill level and an adherence to a certain practice that is really kind of rewarding and somewhat difficult to do well. And so it makes for a great experience, and that's what makes it different.
It's funny that you touched on bone fishing in that response, because I was about to ask you. My wife and I did our honeymoon was in the Bahamas, and it was a long time ago. And we did something that we refer now to as holding the pole, but they called bone fishing. We went out on a boat, spent the whole 8 or 10 hours out on this boat with some other folks, and you would cast out. The boat. I think the boat keeps moving. I don't think we ever just set in one place. It's been a while, but I seem to recall that. But we would just cast out, and the idea, as I understood it, as I recall, was that it would land on the water, and we were fishing for fish that were very close to the surface.
That's right.
But we never found out because no one on the boat actually caught anything or had any bites or anything, which is why we called it holding the pole. And I was going to ask you to distinguish between bone fishing and fly fishing, just so I could get in my Bahamas fishing story. But thank you for covering that. Okay.
Well, you're certainly welcome. My pleasure. And I got to tell you, there are many days when I've simply held the pole.
Yeah. Well, sometimes a good day of fishing is just holding the pole.
Just holding the pole.
I actually remember my in-laws had a house on the water here in St. Petersburg, where we all live. And I would sit out for hours with my father-in-law, and never catching anything, but he would tell me all these stories. He was German from the old country, served in World War II, and my favorite story about him is after a year or two of sitting with him and talking, I finally got up the nerve, and he had been in the Army, he'd been a colonel, retired colonel. I finally got up the nerve and said to him, and we called him Colonel, I said, Colonel, I don't know how to ask you this, but which side were you on in the war? He loved that.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's a hoot.
Yes, I had one of the.
I'm with you.
I had one of the few German father-in-laws who served on the Allied side in World War II, and 30-year American colonel. So, but I didn't know that at that time, and there was no internet back then to look him up. So
Yeah.
So let me ask you this: what are the most important elements of a fishing excursion? I mean, does it have to be expensive to be fun, or is it more about the company you keep?
Oh, I think it's absolutely the company you keep. By comparison, let's say when I organized trips to this little community in Missouri. Why golly, we just drive there, and the tariff for the guides was, I think, $100 a day, which I got to tell you is pretty inexpensive. And then you stay at the, Bide-A-Wee motel for $35 a day. And then you can go get a hamburger at the Sonic Drive-In in nearby Houston, Missouri. So, I wouldn't say that it's exceptionally expensive. You might buy a fancier beer for your six-pack that you're taking, but no, it's not expensive. Now, this, of course, contrasts with the proposition of going on a bone fishing trip to some more exotic place. Let's say one time I went with a group of people to Las Roques, some islands off the coast of Venezuela. Well, you got big plane full of 8 guys, and you fly to Caracas, and then you catch a second airplane from Caracas to land on this little strip in Las Roques in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico or Caribbean. And then you go fishing with guys in pangas, and that ain't particularly cheap either. So the tariff can get up into multi thousands of dollars, frankly. So yeah, there's quite a variance there. And oftentimes if you've been able to do something like this that's more fancy, and expensive. You say to yourself, why am I doing this when I could just be in Licking, Missouri having one hell of a good time for a lot less money and maybe less frustration. But at any rate, yeah, there's quite a variance, but you sure as heck can have a good time. Well, I can go out to Tampa Bay right now and wade out 35 feet, 40 feet, and have a great time. And there's a lot of small stuff I could catch with a fly rod and have a ball.
And what do you absolutely positively have to have on a fishing trip with you for either for your happiness, your comfort, whatever it might be?
Well, probably the primary requirement is you've got to have companions that are fun to be with, and guides that are going to be more than neutral, going to be friendly to you. Because there's a lot of time, as you said earlier in our discussion, where you're going to be in a boat with somebody for 5 or 6 hours, and Lord knows if they're taciturn or difficult or a pain in the butt, the guide or your friend, and I don't know why they're a friend in that case, but you've got to spend a lot of time with them. And so, frankly, from the get-go, if you're going to do something like this and spend a lot of time fishing with somebody, you would certainly hope that they can give you an enjoyable time and be good comrades for the trip.
Do you have a regular group that you fish with, and if so, do you occasionally introduce someone new to the group, or do you pretty much just stick to who you know? And
for the most part, it's guys you've known who have invited you to join them on something, and then you put something together and invite them, etc. It's a fly fishing in particular is kind of a wow. You have to find somebody come up to you and say, I understand you fly fish and you go to fish the Bahamas, and I can do that. I'd like to go with you, but I don't know how to fly fish. And you think, oh boy, because there's a chasm there. It's got to be covered, for both of you to enjoy the experience. I once had a business relationship with a gentleman who was a hunter. He shot elk, he shot moose, Rocky Mountain goats, the whole business, But he fished. But he said to me once, I'd like to do this fly fishing. I've taken a few lessons in it, and so I can do this okay. And I went out with him and saw that, I guess he could sort of get this done. But then he wanted to go on a fishing trip with me to the Bahamas, okay? So I said, that sounds like a great idea. Now, here's the deal. You got to catch this, you got to go to Nassau, then you got to catch a second airplane, then you got to go to this lodge. And by the way, you have to 3 days. And then, he said, stop, you mean if I have a business problem or something, I just can't get off the island and go take care of it? No. No. End of discussion. You're there.
Yeah.
And so his character, his nature, just doesn't quite fit with the whole program, frankly. He was a guy that was really ADD, aggressive, hard-charging. It didn't work.
Yeah, good guy to go to lunch with.
Yeah, good stories and everything, but then, after that.
Yeah, I don't know that. I do know. I'm not a guy to go out on a boat with for 4 to 6 or 8 hours. I get distracted. If the fish aren't biting immediately, I'm thinking about work or other things, and I'm just looking at my watch, going, okay, is it time to go back yet? Is it time to go back yet?
No, you're not the right guy.
No, I'm not. I think I'm better as I've gotten older in terms of patience and being able to cut off from things. But I don't think I could do it.
No, the ADHD person's not going to enjoy this experience.
Yeah, I could see that. And is it always men in the group, or are there ever women on the group with you?
Well, I've only fished with men in the group. However, having said that, I've done some fishing on the Yellowstone in Montana with a good friend of mine and his wife, and I've taken Diana, my wife, and I would say that women can be absolutely some of the best fly fishermen, beyond a doubt, because of the sense of touch more than anything else. it just amazed. My friend's wife, could take fish where other people weren't. She had the ability to just handle a fly rod and present the fly and have a sensitivity to the fish with her hands that was extraordinary. And I'm aware that people like Joan Wolfe, famous fly fisher woman, are very well known for their skills. So no, I don't think that it's not just a manly practice. It just happens to be in my case that most of them were guys.
Okay. All right. I want you to finish this sentence, Marshall.
Yep.
The worst day fishing is better than the best day.
Fill it in. No, it's just you'd have to fill it in. It's anything you choose to put in there. But fishing for me has always been a terrific experience, and it's always totally enjoyable, even when I catch nothing, and I might get rained out, and the car might run out of gas or whatever. It doesn't matter. It was a day fishing, and I think I could say that.
I got it. All right, and so let's talk a little bit about the book, putting the book together. This was your first published book. What was the hardest part of the book to write for you?
Let's see. Hardest part. That's an interesting question. I had a hard part getting into my forward, where I talk about why I do what I do, who I do it with, why this is important to me, why I want to write about it. Because I don't, and I guess in my core about fishing, I feel very deep and profound feelings about it. But that makes you one boring person if you start talking like that. And one of the things, just on a side note, I make that if you go to a party somewhere of men and women, and you're gathered and you have a drink in your hand and chatting with somebody, the easiest way to drive everybody off is to say, let me talk about fishing. They're gone, okay? And the more passionate about you can be sometimes in those circumstances, you really drive them away. But me as a writer and doing this book and telling my stories, I have to think about, I'm really focused on the things that are fun and interesting for the reader, the things that are funny, and things that are kind of that are touching about human interaction. That's the stuff I want to get to, and I don't want to let my passion for it to get in the way. I don't want to start giving a speech about the significance of fishing in mankind. I'm not doing that. This is about going out and having a good time, and about the interesting people you do it with.
Well, maybe this is the right point. I had asked you ahead of time if you would be comfortable reading just a short excerpt from the book. Do you have that handy? Can you?
Oddly enough, I do.
Okay. Can you? You want to go ahead? What chapter is this from? What's the title of the chapter?
This is from the story called Snookin.com, which it tells about a trip, one of many I made, but one I made to down to Chokoloskee, Florida, in the 10,000 Islands, to go fishing for snook, fly fishing. And anyhow, this is what it's about a guide we got and what we did. One early spring afternoon, Lieutenant Colonel Jim Craven, U.S. Army retired ex-military cop, and I followed this route south to combat the snook and redfish said to populate the 10,000 islands. We have been abetted in this activity by our wives, who have presented each of us with a Christmas gift of a half-day guided fishing trip. Jim and I compared our gifts and understood with a little calculus, we determined that we had between us one full day guided fishing trip. We came to the inescapable conclusion that we owed it to ourselves to book a second day, just in case there was a monsoon on the first. Now, a guided fishing trip costs many ducats as compared with a self-guided sortie where you motor your own boat around the 10,000 islands. I have fished out of Chokoloskee with both a guide and without. Once out of sight of that little promontory of land, dotted by fishing shanties and boat trailers, you might as well be on Mars for all the chance you have of making it back on your own. There's also the little matter of knowing where the fish are. Everything looks good. Every point and indentation in the mangroves screams out, "Throw in here, a 15-pound snook will inhale the next piece of plastic chucked this way." This is bogus. You may cast at perfectly beautiful shoreline until you need a rotator cuff transplant and catch nada. There's also the matter of tide, which waits for no man. The flats you were hauling across 45 minutes ago at flank speed to get to Alligator Bay are now a brown expanse where an exposed whelk looks like a high-rise. Guides know their tides. Now, the issue of finding a suitable guide is a major one. You could drive up to the Chokoloskee docks and follow the advice of a hand-painted sign, "Fish with Captain Bob, 20 years experience," directed to a nearby beer and bait emporium by an amiable dock jockey hanging out with the pelicans. You would find Captain Bob polishing off a breakfast of a cold one and a Slim Jim. Now, engaged for the day, Captain Bob would situate you in his 20-year-old Mako with the worn gunnels and the torn cushions. He'd slam down the throttle and head for the outside, is what they call it. Once there, he would net 4 gazillion threadfin herring for bait, move to a likely spot, chuck the anchor, and hand you a pole with 50-pound test line. Thereupon, he would chum up every predatory fish within a half mile, and shortly rods would be bending. But would this be any fun? Well, of course it would. But Colonel Jim and I come with baggage that removes catching a lot of fish from the realm of possibility. We are in it for suffering, angst, and very few fish. We are fly fishermen. Being fly fishermen, we need a special sort of a guide. We need someone with an expensive flats boat with a poling platform, a push pole made of rare earth metals, and a stash of sage and Loomis rods that have been hand-polished by Caltech PhD candidates. We need someone whose daily tariff for putting all these material goods at our disposal is equal to the annual income of a moderately prosperous Vietnamese village. We also need someone who will not guffaw and injure themselves falling off the poling platform when Jim and I make what we refer to as a cast.
That's good. That's a perfect selection to give people an idea what the book is about. A little bit of information, a little bit of humor, a little bit of writing style. I like it. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have just a couple more questions, and we'll let you get back to your life. Did you learn anything about yourself in the course of writing about and examining your fishing experiences?
Wow, interesting question. Yeah, I guess but the whole process of writing is for me a difficult one, and I find there's a quote by a famous writer, or I think actually a musician who was composing, and humorously he wrote, "Well, every day I sit down at 9 o'clock and the muse arrives and I start making things up, and it just flows out of the pen." That's not true. It requires a lot of thinking and a lot of preparation, a lot of standing on the other side of the pen thinking what the person who's reading it is going to be thinking. And so it requires you to be yourself and be someone outside looking in, which is kind of an interesting experience. And you begin to piece together what you find interesting and think about what somebody else will. And it kind of evolves you, I think, as a person. Writing makes you be more introspective, I think, than I would be ordinarily.
Interesting answer. Now, I should mention that you also illustrated the book. I know you talked earlier in the conversation about that you did some writing in college. You did some business writing over the years that you were out in the business world. But you may downplay this, but I actually like the illustrations. They have a little stylish touch to them. They're of a body. Where does that come from? Is that just you scribbling, or is that do you have some training for that?
I don't have training. I've taken here in St. Petersburg. I've gone to the art center and taken courses in drawing and painting and a bit, but very very limited amount. My wife is the painter and she's the artist, not me. But I do like to draw, and I enjoyed the process of doing those pictures. Yeah. Now I would say doing figures is a little harder and people, but yeah, I could handle the fishing lures and so forth.
All right. And last question: what's next? Will there be more fishing stories? Will there be something else? What have you got planned? Okay.
Well, I'm want to put in the can. I really would love to do a couple of books about Everglades City and Chokoloskee, but kind of step back from just this fishing business. And well, I do have a story that's kind of a crime mystery piece, and that's a very popular kind of a genre. You know, the Florida mystery story, and there's a lot of folks doing that. My favorite, of course, is Carl Hyacin, who has the right approach that I would love to aspire to. But yeah, I'm putting together something along those lines, and I'd like to publish that.
Very cool. All right. Well, folks, listen. You can find Marshall Craig's book, You'll Need a Guide, Fishing Stories That Aren't Much About the Fish, in great stores everywhere, or you can order it right now at a great price at mrmediabooks.com. That's mrmediabooks.com. Also available on Amazon, of course. You've got a website now?
Yes.
What's the address for that?
The address is www.craiglit.life.
Craiglit.life. And then Facebook as well.
Yes. Yes, we got to have a site on Facebook.
Do you know what the account name is?
That's Marshall Craig is the lead off at I think Craig Lit Life again. I'm afraid I can't remember right now.
I'm sure people can find it.
Yes, I do.
All right. Well, Marshall Craig, a lot of fun talking to you. We're thrilled to have published your book, and thanks so much for joining us in Mr. Media today.
Thank you, Bob. It's a pleasure.
Turn up the stereo receiver.